Welcome to D&D Build, where we have an outlet to make all sorts of ridiculous Dungeons & Dragons characters and stop driving the people in our lives insane with them. Today we're going to be diving into the MCU and building Hawkeye. He's just a fairly normal, well-trained guy that happens to be really good with the bow and arrow. And since we're building Hawkeye from the MCU, outside of the Avengers, what's your most favorite obscure comic book character? Let me know in the comments down below, and I'll let you know my favorite towards the end of this video. Now let's dive into the build. If you like Dungeons & Dragons content, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I post tons of it, or feel free to join our Discord, linked in the description. And if you want access to the character sheets for my builds, or plenty of other perks, feel free to check out my Patreon, linked in the description down below, like these incredibly kick-ass people, who even voted that this was going to be the next build. When building Hawkeye, we need to come up with a way to pull off a whole bunch of trick arrows, and luckily D&D has a few ways to pull that off. But first things first, we gotta pick a race. Clint Barton is one of the few fairly normal humans, but he is very well trained, so we're going to go with a human variant. Being a human variant, you get a few basic human things, and you get a feat. And what better feat to pick than Sharpshooter? Sharpshooter is a go-to feat for a lot of people that use a bow and arrow. It allows you to attack at a very long range without disadvantage. Your ranged weapons ignore half and 3/4 cover, so that way if somebody just peeks their head out, you can get a quick shot off and really nail your target. And one of the biggest parts of this feat is that before you make an attack with a ranged weapon, you can choose to take a -5 penalty to the attack roll, and if it hits, you can add +10 to the damage, which is pretty big in D&D. When it comes to a background, in the movies he seems to be trained by the military, but in the comics he actually was a circus performer and then later a criminal. So we can go with a lot of options here, but I'm going to go with the movie version, and we're going to go ahead and grab Soldier. This gives us the skill proficiencies in athletics and intimidation, and I think that fits pretty well. Then we got to distribute some stats, and the main stat for anybody that's going to be using a bow, because it's all about those fine motor skills and getting very, very accurate at a long range. So we're going to dump strength and then boost our dexterity all the way up to 15, and then get another +1 from being a human variant. Then we're going to take our constitution, bump it up to 15, because even though you're a human, you managed to survive all of these battles except for maybe losing some hearing. So with 15 in constitution, you can get another +1 from being a human variant, bringing that to 16. Then intelligence we're going to dump, not because he's not particularly smart, but just because we don't have a lot of points to spare. Then we're going to take our wisdom, bump it up to 15, which I know is an odd number, which is a bit of a no-no in D&D, but don't worry, we'll address that later. And then we're going to dump charisma because he likes staying out of the spotlight more often than not. When deciding on a class, there's 3 main classes that usually rely on some sort of ranged attack. That's rogues, fighters, and of course rangers. And despite having some ability to go with some stealth, that's not usually what Hawkeye relies on unless he's in more of a dark and brooding mood. So we'll ditch the rogue, and we really need some sort of class that's going to allow us to have some trick arrows. And despite the fact that rangers have access to plenty of magic, their actual abilities to enchant their arrows is surprisingly lacking. They only get a couple spells that really enhance that ability. So instead, we're going to jump into fighter. This works especially well because fighters are some of the most well-trained, and Clint Barton has a serious amount of training under his belt. At first level of fighter, you get proficiency in all armor and shields, as well as all weapons. You get access to saving throws in strength and constitution, and you get 2 skills. Despite your hearing loss, you're still pretty perceptive, so we're going to go with perception, and we'll grab acrobatics because that'll help utilize our dexterity. Also at first level of fighter, we get to choose a fighting style, and there's no doubt about it, we're obviously going to go with archery. This gives you a +2 bonus to your attack rolls you make with ranged weapons, and that's going to really help to offset any -5s that you take from using your sharpshooter feat. The last thing you get from being a fighter at first level is second wind, allowing you to use a bonus action to regain a couple hit points equal to 1d10 plus your fighter level. Then at second level of fighter, you get action surge. This allows you to double the amount of actions you can take in a single turn. That's pretty darn crucial and a massive staple of the fighter class. Then at third level, you get to pick a martial archetype, and this is where we finally get to start leaning into using some trick arrows, so we're going to take Arcane Archer. I'm not the biggest fan of this class because I feel like their trick arrows are a little limited, but there are a few times where Hawkeye just runs out of arrows, so it really works. When you pick this fighter archetype, you get access to Arcane Archer lore, giving you access to either Arcana or the Nature skill. So we're going to take Nature because magic really isn't your thing most of the time. And then you get to learn either Prestidigitation, which is a cantrip I always have trouble saying, or Druidcraft. We're going to take Prestidigitation, and that's a very minor magical ability, which might cover some of the minor technology that Hawkeye has access to. Also, when you decide on this archetype, you get access to Arcane Shot. You can learn 2 options at this level, and once per turn when you fire an arrow from your bow, you can apply 1 arcane shot. And the 2 choice trick arrows that I would pick from this list are going to be bursting arrow, because that really makes the most sense, because it's an arrow that blows up, which definitely seems like something that Hawkeye would have, and it deals 2d6 force damage to everybody within 10 feet of the creature that you hit with the arrow. And this can be on top of the normal damage you deal when you strike that enemy in the first place. Then the other option I would go with is grasping arrow. This can be a pretty fun trick arrow to use. It does release some poison damage, and it slows down the enemy, as a bunch of vines or cords just sprout out from the arrow after it hits the creature, dealing some poison damage, reducing that speed, and dealing slashing damage on the first of every one of that enemy's turns. And if that enemy wants to break out of that grasping arrow, they actually need to take an action to do it, really helping that action economy of yours. At 4th level of fighter, you get your first ability score improvement, and we're actually only going to put 1 point into dexterity here, bringing it to an odd number, and then 1 point into wisdom, finally making that an even number. And then at 5th level, you get the all-important extra attack, allowing you to fire 2 arrows in a single turn, and 4 arrows if you use your action surge. Then at 6th level of fighter, you get another ability score, because fighters get tons of ability scores more than anybody else. So we're going to boost our dexterity again, bringing it to 19, 1 point short of the maximum. And then right after that, we get to jump right back over to Arcane Archer and pick up Magic Arrow. This allows us to infuse your arrows with magic, so whenever you fire any arrow, it counts as magical for the purpose of overcoming resistances. Additionally, at this level, you get access to Curving Shot, so when you make an attack roll with an arrow and it misses, you can use your bonus action to re-roll the attack against a different target within 60 feet of the original target. And this is going to be super useful to mix in with your sharpshooter feat, because you might be more likely to miss a creature, but this gives you a whole second chance to still hit something. Lastly, at this level, from being an Arcane Archer, you get access to 1 more Arcane Shot option of your choice. I would go with Seeking Arrow, so you can really pull off that shot without even looking. Only issue with this is that you can't mix it with your sharpshooter feat, but that's okay, you don't want to use it all the time anyways. Then at 8th level, we get another standard ability score improvement, but we're going to take a feat. The damage type of pretty much every bow is piercing damage, so we're going to take the feat Piercer. This gives us a 1 point boost to either our strength or dexterity, and now we can finally max out our dexterity to 20, and it boosts our piercing damage. When you hit a creature with an attack that deals piercing damage, you can re-roll one of the attack's damage die if you need to. And if you score a critical hit that deals piercing damage to that creature, you can roll 1 additional damage die when you roll for that damage. Then at 9th level, you get the fighter feature, Indomitable. This allows you to re-roll a saving throw if you fail, but you can only do it once per long rest. And at 10th level, you get access to another Arcane Arrow option. So we're going to take Piercing Arrow. This allows you to essentially fire what would be a drill arrow, as it goes in a straight line for 30 feet, and it passes through every possible thing along the way. It deals the normal damage from your bow. It can't use the sharpshooter feat because you don't actually roll an attack roll, but it does deal an extra 1d6 piercing damage. Then at 11th level, we get another extra attack, meaning that you get 3 attacks per round, or 6 if you use your action surge. Then I was super tempted to multiclass here and finally jump into Ranger. But the thing is, Ranger really doesn't get a lot of trick arrow options. They might get access to something like Swift Quiver, allowing them to shoot faster, but fighters get to shoot pretty damn fast already, especially if they use their action surge. Lastly, they get something like Elemental Weapon or Fire Arrow, adding some elemental damage, which could be kinda cool, but we already have a Magic Arrow from being an Arcane Archer, so it doesn't help that much. And finally, the last thing we would really be missing out on is Lightning Arrow. It's one of the most powerful arrow-based spells that Rangers have, but I don't want to do a full-blown multi-class at this level just to get one spell. It seems like such a waste. Plus, some of the features of Lightning Arrow is really similar to Bursting Arrow. So I feel like no matter what, we're pretty well covered by being an Arcane Archer, even though I did kind of crap on the subclass earlier. So with that being said, at level 12 you do get another ability score improvement, but you're already pretty perceptive, so it would be kind of a waste to boost your wisdom. You're staying out of the fight as much as possible, plus you're not as hardy as like the Hulk or something, so it's not super worth it to boost up your constitution again. So we're going to take yet another feat and grab Fighting Initiate. Most of what we see Hawkeye wearing is essentially leather armor throughout most of the Avengers and the comics. So just to make sure that he can dodge the attacks a little bit better, we're going to boost our defense with the defense fighting style, giving us +1 to our armor class. Then at 13th level you can use Indomitable one more time per long rest, and then at 14th level you get another ability score improvement. And like I just covered with all of the other ability scores, we're pretty well covered. So we're going to grab another feat, and this time we're going to grab Crossbow Expert. And I know that Hawkeye doesn't really use a crossbow very often. He's really relying on that actual longbow. But there's one important feature of the crossbow feat that is going to be super helpful as Hawkeye. When you make a ranged attack in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, if you have an enemy within 5 feet of you, they can easily smack your bow and force the entire attack to be at disadvantage. So any ranged attacks you're making with an enemy within 5 feet of you is always at disadvantage. But with the Crossbow Expert feat, you get to ignore that altogether. Because while this does give you some bonuses to using a crossbow, the real bonus here with this feat is that being within 5 feet of a hostile creature doesn't impose disadvantage on your ranged attack rolls anymore. So you can just lean back and fire another arrow even if they're right next to you. Just do yourself a favor and don't accidentally fire one of your bursting arrows, because you're going to be one of the people affected by it. Then at 15th level you get Ever Ready Shot. So when the battle starts, if you roll initiative and have no more uses of your arcane shot remaining, you gain 1 use of it. Because one of the biggest downsides of this subclass is that you can only use an arcane shot twice per short or long rest. So this drastically improves the overall class, but it does take until 15th level in order to get that. Then you get access to one more arcane shot option, so we're going to take Shadow Arrow, essentially being able to blind an enemy that you hit with your magic arrow. And this seems very fitting for something that you might have in your bag of tricks. Then at 16th level, you get yet again another ability score improvement. So we're going to take another feat, and with all of the training that you have, we're going to take Alert. This makes it so you can't be surprised while you're conscious because you're so aware of your surroundings, and you get +5 to your initiative, meaning you're always ready for battle. Lastly, no creatures get advantage on attack rolls against you just because you can't see them. This is just really letting your training kick in and do its magic. Then at 17th level, you get another action surge to use. So now you can use 2 action surges per short or long rest. And you get another use of Indomitable, which you can now use 3 times per long rest. Then at 18th level, you get access to one more arcane shot option, and it's really down to 3 fairly magical options at this point, but Beguiling Arrow does feel more like Scarlet Witch. Enfeebling Arrow makes you charm an enemy, and that really doesn't feel right. So we're going to take Banishing Arrow, because this might be some crazy technology you might get access to as being a member of the Avengers, but it essentially knocks an enemy into another dimension. It only lasts for a turn, and it doesn't feel as useful, but it's still going to be what fits the character best. Then the biggest thing about your arcane shot at this level is that all of your arcane shots are upgraded. So even this Banishing Arrow that doesn't deal any additional damage when you hit a creature with it now deals 2d6 force damage along with the hit. And this is true for most of your arcane shot options. Your Seeking Arrow deals an additional 2d6 force damage. Your Piercing Arrow now deals 2d6 piercing damage instead of 1d6. Your Grasping Arrow deals 4d6 poison damage instead of 2d6. Your Shadow Arrow that blinded people but also dealt 2d6 psychic damage now deals 4d6 psychic damage, and your Bursting Arrow gets upgraded from 2d6 force damage to 4d6 force damage, which I know is a lot of numbers to throw at you, but just know all of your damage is upgraded. Then at 19th level, you get another ability score improvement, and I'm really running out of stuff to give Hawkeye at this point. So just because you can still fight alongside the Avengers, even though you've gotten pretty banged up, we're gonna take the feat Tough. We could take some points and throw it into Constitution, increasing our Constitution by 2 and getting 1 more additional hit point per level, but Tough is a little better because if we're not worried about making Constitution saving throws, Tough makes it so you get 2 more hit points per level. So now at 19th level, you wind up with an additional 38 hit points. And then finally at 20th level, max level of this build, you get 1 more extra attack as a fighter. So now you deal 4 attacks in a single turn, or 8 attacks if you use one of your action surges. This is probably the most amount of feats I've thrown in for any possible build, but it really just kind of felt good to do it. This was requested by a commenter, and if you have a build that you want, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Or if you just think this build sucks or you would do it a totally different way, let me know there too. I try and read as many of the comments as possible. And if you want to chat about stuff even more, I got a brand new public Discord linked down in the description below. And I asked you to put in the comments who your favorite obscure comic book character is, and personally, one of my favorites is Forget-Me-Not. He's part of the X-Men, but nobody remembers him. His mutant power is that he's instantly forgotten about. He winds up being the reason that the X-Men succeed most of the time, but nobody remembers it. It's a super interesting yet super sad character, and I love him. And if you want access to this character sheet or any of my other character sheets, along with access to the Discord and plenty of other benefits, feel free to check out my Patreon linked in the description down below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, let me know by hitting that like button, and I'll be here hoping you roll at least 3 nat 20s in your next D&D session, especially if you plan on fighting a giant horde of alien creatures with a bow and arrow, even if that makes almost no sense.